Hello everyone, Alison Ingleby here, and this is, I've lost count actually, I think it's the seventh or the eighth in my video series looking at my writing process. And I said to you last week that my target was to finish the first draft of The Shadow City by today. I haven't quite managed it. I have exceeded my word count target, so I was aiming for 60,000 words for this book. It's currently standing at 72,000, so I've gone a little bit over, which I do have a tendency to do, so I'm going to have to rein that in during the editing stage. I had a little bit of a frustrating week again. I was pretty tired, struggled with brain fog. If you've ever had that, you know what I mean. It's just that feeling when you pretty much can't even string a sentence together, let alone think about a coherent thought. And it's really, I find it really frustrating because it feels like I'm spending a long time to achieve very little. That said, today I really picked up. I managed to dictate about 6,000 words today, which for me is a massive amount. That is rough dictation, so it does need a lot of editing, but at least it's a start. And I've got through, I'm currently at the really exciting part actually, so it's kind of a bit of a shame to stop, but I'm going to give my brain a rest and come back to it tomorrow. So I'm at the kind of climax of the climax, and then I just got the resolution to do to wrap things up. So I'm hoping that if I have another good day tomorrow, I should have finished that first draft tomorrow, and then I can move on to editing, which is what I'm going to talk about this week. Now, different writers have different self-editing needs and processes. I do know some authors who their first draft is so clean that all they really need to do before they send it to their editor is do a sort of read through and a line edit, tweaking sentences, looking out for typos, maybe changing descriptions and just checking that everything's okay. I don't work quite as neatly as that. I wish I did. And I have to do a kind of an additional step before that, which looks at the more developmental side. So really looking at making sure the pacing's right, the character structure's right, the structure of the story makes sense. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about my process and how I do that, and specifically what I'm going to be doing with The Shadow City later this week. So I guess the first thing is that even before I start the big picture editing, I have another couple of steps to do with this specific book. So firstly, because I've been dictating a lot over the last couple of days, normally when I dictate, I do edits as I go. So I'll go through the text that I've just dictated and correct all the wrong words, the things that don't actually make any sense. Because when you dictate, the software is pretty good, but there are a lot of errors, and often it'll mix up different words. For example, one of my characters, whenever I say his name, it comes out on the screen as they, as in They. For some reason, I've tried correcting it numerous times and it just doesn't pick it up, so I've given up for now. And yeah, sometimes, and if I forget to mention punctuation, for example, I'll need to go and add that in. I always add speech marks in later because I find it makes my dictating faster. So because I've been really focused on getting the first draft finished, I haven't done that for the past couple of days. So certainly once I've finished, hopefully tomorrow, my first task after that is to go through and just give that a rough cleanup. So, I've got some copy that makes sense. The other thing I need to do is to go right back to the beginning and do some work on the initial chapters. So when I first started writing this, I started writing in present tense, so first person present tense, which is, I'd say, probably my preferred style. But I got about 6 chapters in and I did a bit more research, and I realized that the vast majority of the books in the kind of genres I was looking at are first person past tense. And I do know that present tense is a bit of a Marmite thing. People either love it or hate it. I personally love it. But for this book particularly, I guess I wanted to give people what they want. And I think more people enjoy reading past books which are written in past tense than present tense. So I switched after about 6 chapters in. So I need to go back and rewrite those initial chapters in past tense. So I'm going to do both of those before I even start looking at the story. The next thing I tend to do, and ideally what I like to do, is to give myself a bit of a break and let the book rest for at least a week or so. I probably won't have time for that now, but I'm still gonna try and stick to my process as far as possible. So what I tend to do is to go back to some of my craft books and start reading them again, because that puts me in the frame of mind to start thinking about what might need to be improved with my story. And the first thing I guess I'll do is I have a spreadsheet of all my scenes and chapters, which again I need to update because I'm a bit behind on, and the word counts for each of those. So I use those to sort of see if I'm in line with the structure I developed, which I usually do as a brief outline according to Save the Cat, and whether my beats for each act are in the right place. And if they're not, then that gives me a hint. I don't stick to it rigidly. I very much follow the story. But if, for example, you know, I've got 2 chapters for my first act and then like 20 chapters for my second act and 3 chapters for my third act, that's not balanced. So I'll have a look and see how my word counts are doing for that. I know one thing I need to look at for this particular book is my chapter length. So I started off being quite consistent with my chapter lengths, but as I've gone on, and certainly in the second half, they've got a lot longer. So I need to decide whether I'm going to split those up or keep them as they are. And part of that might come down to how much things change during the editing process. The other books I read are Libby Hawker's Take Off Your Pants, which is about character arcs and character outlines. So that helps me think about whether I've got a good arc for my character and not just my main character, because usually I sort my main character out when I'm plotting beforehand. It's more the secondary characters, and a lot of the time my secondary characters will develop and find their voices as the book goes on. So I have to go back to that and think, okay, well, you know, where do they start, where are they finishing, and what do I need to do? Do I need to add in more screen time with them, show a different side to their personality perhaps? So that's really important for that. And the other one, which I really love and recommend, is The Emotional Craft of Fiction. And I love writing stories that make people feel. So I love books that can make me laugh and make me cry. And that's really my aim and my ambition, is to write those type of books. And this is a really good book for looking at how you can create a really good emotional resonance in your story, and I find it really helpful. It is quite a dense book, so the writing's pretty small and it takes me quite a while to read it. I have read it, because I try and read it pretty much after every book I write. I've read it 3 or 4 times, so even though I know the content quite well, I tend to skim through it and pick out some of the pertinent things. And what I find often is when I'm doing that, things will come to mind that then link to my book, and I have to make a note of these, or sometimes I go and change them straight away. So that's kind of the first step, or my first step in developmental editing. At the same time, or afterwards, depending on how much of a break I can leave, I then download my entire manuscript onto my Kindle and read through my story from the beginning. And while I'm doing this, I'll make notes on things such as pacing, structure, character arc, anything that is out of place, anything that needs adding in. So for example, because I've been writing these climax scenes and the exciting stuff at the end, I've got a couple of things where I've written in something that a character says earlier in the book, except they haven't actually said that yet because I didn't write that in originally. So I need to go back in and find a suitable place to add in those kind of comments, or, you know, a bit of foreshadowing for what might be happening. And yeah, and again, for Shadow City, I'm really going to be looking at those secondary characters and which of those I develop and which I might actually cut, because I have got quite a lot of characters in the book, and that's partly because it's setting up for a series, and partly because it kind of moves between sort of 2 different worlds. But I really need to have a close look and see if they are all actually required for this book, or if I cut any of them, which is always sad, but sometimes necessary. And the other thing that I need to do with this particular book, and I'll probably do this, I guess, after I've hopefully fixed some of the main plot points, is around the character voice. So I find it quite hard to get into the voice of my character until I've written a book or two in their heads. So certainly with my last series, I found that book 2 was where I really kind of found my voice for that series. I feel like I struggled a bit with this because it's the first book, it's the first time as I'm getting used to the character, and as I mentioned, I switched from present tense to past tense, so that didn't really help. I feel like as I've got towards the end, I've really got into that character's head and got her voice sorted. So I think I've got a fair bit of editing to do to go back to the beginning and to kind of try and make that a bit more consistent. So some of that comes into the developmental side, and some of that comes into the more line editing. So that's quite a lot of work. So I am slightly intimidated by how much I have to do before my deadline. Hopefully I can get that certainly started this week, and some of the sort of big changes done. And that is all before I actually move on to the line editing, which I will be talking more about next week. And that's kind of the bit I like, because it's polishing it and the end is in sight. So I'm always quite happy when I get onto that stage. But for now, that's where I'm at. I hope that's been useful, helpful, interesting to learn a bit more about that stage of the process. And I will be back for another video next week. Goodbye for now.